everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Senator Mark Kelly. Senator, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be on, Brittany.
It is April 2nd, and as President Trump touted, today is Liberation Day, where he will unveil his sweeping tariff policy. We have seen his tariff policy in the past couple of months in his second term. So knowing what you've seen before, what's your reaction here?
Well, I don't think we know exactly what to expect, and I'm trying to figure out what our American taxpayers and families going to be liberated from exactly. My view of what is likely to happen is I think this is probably going to be one of the biggest tax increases in American history, especially for working class and middle class folks. This is what Donald Trump sort of has. On one side, he talks about tax cuts, but those are tax cuts for the wealthy. This is going to hurt families in the opposite direction, and I really don't think he really cares all that much about it. Throughout history, we've been a country that sticks with our partners. In this case, he seems to be just sticking it to the American people. And my expectation are the things that families rely on, groceries and housing and fuel. These things are just going to go up in cost, and it's going to hurt our economy.
Do you think these tariffs this time are going to stick? Because for the past few months, what can only be described as tariff whiplash has been happening, where President Trump has started, paused, threatened tariffs and trade wars with our allies and adversaries alike. So do you think that this will be implemented for the long term?
I don't think anybody knows. I mean, if past is prologue, what we would expect is more of the same, which is the whiplash that you talked about. But, maybe this time he's going to stick with it. And I think it's going to be a really big drag on the economy, and it's going to hurt families. It's going to hurt them a lot. I meet these folks every day, especially when I'm in Arizona, folks that are just struggling to get by, that there's no margin in their budget. Rent's too high, grocery prices are too high. They're trying to pay for their kids to be in a soccer league or baseball league, and there's no extra room in the budget. And when he puts tariffs on all these countries, those tariffs are going to be paid here in the United States, and most of those costs are going to be passed on to consumers. It's pretty simple.
The Auto Workers Union applauded President Trump's tariffs on auto-related things, but the response, to your point, has been largely negative. Mark Zandi, who's the chief economist at Moody's, told me that we are headed to a recession essentially by President Trump's making, and no economist likes tariffs. The market has indicated time and time again they do not like tariffs. Is there any indication that the White House is listening to this criticism?
Well, I think they hear it. I don't know if they're actually actively listening to it and will respond to it. I think it's going to take the American people ultimately to say, hey, we're fed up. Donald Trump ran on reducing costs for American families, especially groceries. He's done absolutely nothing to try to address that issue. And you mentioned cars. Cars that are manufactured here in the United States get parts from overseas. And also those cars, before they're complete, often go back and forth across the border, maybe more than once. And these tariffs are going to be applied. So the price of autos are going to go up. We know that. I guess I get what Donald Trump is trying to do, but he really needs to speak to economists about what the results of what his actions are going to be.
In my conversations with economists, with Democrats and Republicans, no one has been supportive of tariffs writ large. In your private conversations, even with your Republican colleagues, is anyone supportive of these tariffs?
I haven't found anybody, not a single person. I think publicly you might see some folks try to be supportive of the president, some of my Republican colleagues, but in private, everybody thinks this is a bad idea.
Is there anything going to be done then? Because if everyone's saying, hey, it's a bad idea, this is bad for the American consumer, this is bad for the everyday American, what's going to be done for them?
Well, like a lot of issues with regards to this president and this administration, We need our Republican colleagues to get off of the sideline and say things publicly. So he knows they oppose this. And he should be able to understand that if they oppose this, it's because their constituents are going to be hurt by these policies. And their constituents understand that this is bad policy. So I think the best path forward for us, I mean, I can continue to talk about how bad this is publicly, and I can advocate to my Republican colleagues to get off the sidelines. Ultimately, what's going to happen is folks are going to need to, everybody is going to need to be vocal about this and tell the president that you are hurting the American people with these tariffs. You're not helping anybody.
Do you think Republicans who are privately saying one thing, publicly not saying anything at all, do you think they're not saying anything right now because they're scared that President Trump is going to call them out by name?
Probably many of them. Sure. Yeah, I think that's the case.
I do now want to switch gears just a little bit to another story. It's been a little over a week since the story dubbed Signalgate has broken. And just to recap, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic says he was inadvertently added to a group chat with the nation's top security leaders that detailed U.S. plans to conduct an airstrike against the Houthis in Yemen. As I said, it's been a little over a week since this story broke. What questions do you still have?
Well, Brittany, we had the DNI, so the Director of National Intelligence, the head of the FBI, the head of the CIA, the head of the National Security Agency, and the Defense Intelligence Agency in front of the Intelligence Committee, on which I serve, about a day or two after this information broke, that they were sharing information on the unsecured commercial platform Signal. It's very dangerous. And what the Secretary of Defense did, putting highly sensitive, classified information on this platform, was reckless, and it could have put pilots in serious jeopardy. There's a lot of information that we still don't have. I'd say at the top of the list is how many other times have they shared information on other signal chains? Who were on those? Were there anybody else that was inadvertently added, like a journalist, or maybe even worse than that, maybe a foreign national, somebody in another country? And for our adversaries to see what kind of deliberations that our national security leaders take before deciding to strike another country, that seeing that deliberation online, as they all did, that puts us at additional risk. So I want to know what other signal chains are out there, who was on them, what information was shared, and then what are the steps we need to take to make sure that they stop doing this. Nobody has given me any indication that they're going to knock this off and start doing this the way they're supposed to, which is in a secure facility on secure communications equipment.
How do you want to see the administration rectify this? Because you said you've called for the resignation of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Do you think anyone else has to go? I mean, what does that look like?
Well, I think there's a big difference between somebody being careless. And when this signal chain was set up, it was pretty obvious that the person who set it up did not intend to have a bunch of classified information shared. That was done by the Secretary of Defense. So there's a difference between carelessness and recklessness. And I believe that the Secretary of Defense was the reckless party here. And if he doesn't resign, the president should just fire him. He's putting our service members at risk. He did that once. I'm concerned he's going to do that again. He was unqualified for this job. That's why I didn't vote for him. And I called out my Republican colleagues about the risks of putting this unqualified individual who spent the last 9 years, no offense, Brittany, to your profession. Journalism is so important to our country, but it does not prepare you to manage the U.S. Department of Defense. And this is month 2, or maybe month 3 of this administration now. We've got a long way to go, and I'm concerned that Pete Hegseth is going to make other mistakes that aren't going to, put people at risk, but they're actually going to get hurt.
Senator, you are not offending me. I mean, I am a journalist and I would not be qualified to serve as defense secretary. However, I am related to a few veterans and I want to know from your perspective as a veteran, you see what exactly Pete Hegseth as defense secretary texted out over Signal. There's arguments of semantics. Was it a war plan? Was it an attack plan? You see that. What are you thinking?
Well, Brittany, I'll give them that this was not a war plan. A war plan would include joint forces and maybe our allies, and how are you going to resupply? And it would be much more comprehensive than what he put on Signal. What he put on this unsecured commercial app that our allies can access. Well, our allies, our adversaries can get access to. What they put there were critical details of a strike plan. You have pilots that are planning these missions on the aircraft carriers. They're going to fly them. They're going to go into harm's way. The most critical information is where are the aircraft coming from? What time are they launching? What time are they going to be over the target? What kind of airplanes are they? Maybe on top of that, what kind of weapon systems, or certainly maybe something else that actually wasn't there is what's going to be the plan for the suppression of enemy air defenses. But the first five things were shared, and that's the most critical information. You know, as any kind of operator in the military, whether you're a pilot or you're an infantry guy, special forces, some of the most critical information that you possess, often just in your head, is what's going to happen in the next few hours with regards to any conflict, or tomorrow or the next day. After that, most people don't have a lot of information. But the time of launch, down to the minute, by the way, Brittany, this wasn't like around 3 p.m. It said something like 15:26. I mean, down to the very minute, and the time on target down to the minute. What this means to the Houthis, if they had this information, and to be fair, all indications are they did not. But if they had the information, they really don't need to have their early warning system, radar system, working as well as it would otherwise need to work. They know where to look. They know what's coming. They could get everybody alert to the fact that there's an impending strike, and it makes it much, much easier to shoot those airplanes down. And I'm speaking from, I'm a guy who's almost been shot down a bunch of times. I've had an SA-6 on my first of 39 combat missions blow up next to my airplane. Yemen has SA-6s and SA-3s in the country that would have been targeting those F-18 airplanes. This was a reckless move by our Secretary of Defense. And Brittany, if he would have shared that information like a day later or hours after the airplanes got back to the aircraft carrier, it would not have been that big of a deal. But beforehand, it is reckless.
Some Republicans have said, hey, this is a mistake, sure, but no one died. And this is rich coming from Democrats because, as they noted, Signalgate is not as bad as the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, where 13 service members lost their lives, and after that, no one was fired. What do you make of that argument from Republicans?
Well, I mean, it's the whataboutism we often see. And the withdrawal from Afghanistan did not go well at all. The plan to withdraw was Donald Trump's plan. It was executed during the Biden administration. And yeah, it did not go well. And the intelligence community especially got that wrong. I was there in the room when they were saying that this was going to take, possibly months and months, I think upwards of 9 months, and it took less than 9 days before Kabul was, the Taliban took over Kabul, and this whole thing collapsed, and the loss of 13 service members. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible situation, and folks should be held accountable. I am the first one to say that. I mean, as a service member for 25 years, when things are screwed up, there should be an investigation, and people should be held accountable. And in this case, this Signalgate, people screwed up, and the Inspector General of the Pentagon should investigate this, and there should be accountability.
Senator, I'm curious. Yeah, I know you have a lot of questions, and Democratic senators are holding the administration's feet to the fire here. What's next when it comes to any type of investigation?
Well, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker and the ranking member Jack Reed of Rhode Island they've called on the Department of Defense to investigate this. Now, Donald Trump fired the inspector general, so there's an acting inspector general. I've got confidence in him. He should be able to handle this investigation. It should be pretty straightforward. He needs to interview everybody who was on that signal chain, find out how far and deep this misuse of signal has gone and what other information is possibly out there. It's possible that our adversaries have access to other discussions about our national security. And Brittany, this doesn't affect pilots flying off of an aircraft carrier in the Red Sea. When it affects our national security, ultimately it affects all of us.
Senator, I really appreciate the conversation today. You are welcome back anytime. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Brittany. Appreciate you having me on.